Stop trying to control tomorrow. Deep sleep meditation. There is a precise heavy strain gathering right behind your eyelids, a thick pressure in your temples that comes from trying to mentally outthink the chaotic movements of tomorrow. You are lying quite still, yet inside your mind, your arms are shaking from the effort of pulling an invisible line as tight as it will go. You are exhausted from aiming at targets that keep shifting in the dark. The fabric of your mattress carries a cool, crisp texture against your skin, and the small, steady tick of a watch on your bedside table measures a night that is passing whether you manage to organize it or not. The dark air in your room is slowly cooling, sinking toward the floor, carrying away the heat of a frantic day. You are tucked beneath a heavy, textured weave, completely safe from the world outside. Yet your internal landscape remains tightly coiled, braced, and waiting for an impact that has not even arrived. Let your weight drop into that crisp fabric if it feels right. There is no need to maintain a vigilant, upright stance in your mind while the sun is down. The room is quiet, filled only with the low, rhythmic hum of the building or the distant rustle of a tree swaying against the outer wall. This space is entirely yours, a sanctuary where the demanding gaze of the world cannot find you. Tonight, your state of exhaustion is not a flaw in your character, and it is not a sign that your life has completely fallen apart. It is simply the deep fatigue of a person who has spent far too long pulling a bowstring against a storm, hoping that sheer willpower could force an unyielding arrow to fly in a perfectly straight line through a gale. You are permitted to let the wood go completely slack for the next few hours. Your heart does not need to be repaired tonight, and nothing will be demanded or forced during our time together. A profound realization within Buddhist history entirely reframes this internal struggle we carry into our beds. We often operate under the belief that our minds will finally settle into a state of quiet once we have successfully arranged every future circumstance to match our desires. We tell ourselves that if we can just fix that one looming problem, predict that specific reaction, or secure an absolute guarantee for tomorrow, we will finally earn the right to put down our guards. But the ancient practitioners observed a much more liberating truth. True equanimity does not arrive because you have finally forced the outer world into a state of predictable alignment. True ease comes only when you fully relinquish the exhausting demand you place upon the present moment to conform to your design. Maybe you have felt this quiet, ongoing friction within your own heart, dear friend. You knot your deepest wishes onto a string, pull it back with everything you have, and demand that your health, your career, or your relationships travel in an unswerving path toward your chosen goal. Then, the unexpected winds of change blow across your life, drifting your arrow completely wide of the mark. Your immediate reaction is to pull the cord even tighter, straining your shoulders and holding your breath, believing that if you just fight the wind with enough aggression, you can conquer the weather. This constant pulling is what is breaking your spirit. It is not the sudden gale that causes your deep suffering, but the internal exhaustion of refusing to let the bowstring rest unbent. In a short while, we will travel to a high exposed pass where the grass grows sideways, and where a young traveler had to learn how to stop treating the weather like a personal enemy. But before we begin that journey, allow your breathing to drop its careful rhythm. There is no requirement for you to count the seconds, or to force your belly into a deep synthetic movement right now. Just listen to the air as it slides naturally past your lips, and feel the gentle collapse of your rib cage as the breath leaves your body of its own accord. Your lungs understand exactly how to sustain you without your constant supervision. The breath is already carrying you forward, moment by moment, completely independent of your analytical thoughts. You might notice a specific worry hovering near the front of your mind right now, perhaps a memory of an unpleasant comment from this morning, or a lingering dread about a task you must face when the light returns. Try to look at that thought without immediately trying to aim through it. You do not have to solve that riddle before your eyes close. You do not have to find the perfect answer to your life's complications tonight. Let the unfinished business of your week remain completely unbent, sitting quietly in the corner of the room like an unstrung piece of willow wood. The darkness around you is now dense enough to obscure the sharp corners of the furniture, The details of the room are softening, blending into the vast indigo peace of the late hour. Allow your own tight boundaries to soften in the same way. The path ahead of you does not need to be perfectly straight or certain for you to take a long rest from it. You can lie here, entirely surrounded by an unpredictable, changing world, and trust that the ground will hold your weight even when you choose to stop aiming at the future. Far beyond the quiet villages of the valley, where the green mountain tracks dissolve into raw stone, lies the gale-swept pass of the iron grass. It is a lonely, exposed ridge where the wind never rests. The grass does not grow upward toward the sky. It grows completely sideways, hugging the cold earth to survive the relentless mountain currents. The air at this height is always moving, whistling through the rock chimneys with a sharp, high-pitched hum. To this demanding landscape came a young archer named Sora, carrying a heavy quiver of arrows and a mind filled with a restless desire for perfection. He had spent his youth studying the geometry of flight, practicing his form in quiet indoor halls, where no breeze could ever disturb his aim. He believed that a true master should be able to force an arrow through any obstacle, completely conquering the environment by sheer force of will. Upon reaching the summit, he found no grand academy. He saw only a simple hut made of dry thatch and an old man sitting cross-legged on a woven straw mat. This was Master Jin, a retired Fletcher who had lost his sight many winters ago. Jin sat perfectly still, his wrinkled face tilted slightly toward the open sky, listening intently to the wild roar of the gale. He did not look like a warrior. His hands were thin, stained with the pale sap of willow trees, and his breathing was as steady as the deep rock beneath him. He acknowledged the young traveler with a brief nod, then reached down to lift an object resting beside his knee. Jin handed Sora an unpolished willowwood bow. It was entirely adorned, lacking the bright lacquer and silk wrappings of the fine weapons Sora had used in the lowlands. When Sora gripped the rough wood, his thumb immediately felt a tiny, deep microfracture running right along the center of the handle. It felt stiff, heavy, and remarkably stubborn in his palms. Sora looked out across the pass, where a wooden target was staked on the opposite side of a deep, misty chasm. The crosswind between the cliffs was violent, whipping his loose linen sleeves against his forearms and filling his nose with the sharp scent of crushed green weeds. Sora stepped to the edge of the ledge, determined to demonstrate his flawless technique. He selected a heavy arrow, notched it onto the string, and raised the willow bow into the whistling air. He fixed his gaze on the distant red center of the target. He drew the string back toward his ear, feeling the immense resistance of the wood. The bow hummed with a dangerous, high-pitched tension. His shoulders tightened, his breath caught in his throat, and the muscles in his back began to tremble from the immense effort he released the arrow. The string slapped against his guard with a loud twang, but the moment the shaft cleared the bow, the mountain gale caught the feathers. The arrow swerved wildly to the left, sailing harmlessly into the deep white fog of the ravine. A hot flash of frustration flared in Sora's chest. He did not pause to study the wind or to adjust his stance. He immediately snatched a second arrow from his quiver, notched it, and pulled the string back even further than before. He believed that if he could just apply more speed, the arrow would cut through the storm before the wind had a chance to alter its path. He strained his muscles until his vision blurred. The rough string cut deeply into his fingertips, leaving a thin trail of red on the white wood. He released it again. The arrow flew with a desperate hiss, but the crosswind was an unyielding wall. It tossed the projectile aside like a dry twig, sending it crashing against the far rocks. As we watch his struggle expand in the cold mountain air, a deeper change is quietly waiting to reveal itself. Sora refused to accept the outcome. He became a blur of frantic motion, pulling, straining, and releasing arrow after arrow into the void. The metallic scent of sweat mixed with the freezing mountain air. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that burned his throat. With every single shot, the violent vibration of the unyielding willow wood rebounded into his arms, sending a numbing ache deep into his shoulders and his neck. Yet, the harder he fought the storm, the further his targets drifted from his reach. The mountain pass was littered with the remnants of his pride, and his quiver was rapidly growing empty. On his final attempt, Sora gathered every remaining ounce of his physical strength. He planted his boots into the sideways grass, locked his jaw, and pulled the bowstring past its intended limit. He was determined to break the resistance of the weather by absolute force. Suddenly, a dry, sickening crack echoed through the pass. The microfracture along the wooden grip split open under the extreme tension, sending a sharp splinter straight into the palm of his hand. The string went limp, and the unnotched arrow clattered uselessly onto the dirt at his feet. Sora dropped the broken weapon, his hands shaking violently from the exhaustion, and sank to his knees in the cold grit. The heavy, suffocating weight of his own failure pressed down upon his chest, making even a simple breath feel impossible. Master Jin did not move from his straw mat. He did not offer words of pity, nor did he criticize the young man's broken form. He walked slowly over to where the young man was kneeling, his footsteps silent against the packed earth. He took Sora's bleeding palm and gently pressed a small amount of cool balm into the scratch caused by the splinter. The relief was immediate and quiet, causing Sora to catch his breath in the freezing air. Jin looked toward the deep chasm with his sightless eyes, his voice remarkably calm amidst the roaring wind. The old Fletcher leaned down, letting his linen robes brush against the dry ground. He asked the young man why he spent his vital blood trying to teach the wind how to blow straight, when the bow was already trying to tell him how to let go of the target. The quiet question seemed to linger in the air, carrying a strange gravity that caused the frantic noise in Sora's mind to suddenly drop away. He looked down at the broken willow bough resting in the dirt, realizing that the fracture had not been caused by the strength of the mountain gale. It had been caused entirely by his own stubborn determination to keep pulling a rigid line against an unyielding reality. He looked at his bleeding fingers, recognizing the deep, exhausting pattern of his entire life in the valley. He had spent his years treating every unpredictable event, every unmet expectation, and every changing emotion like a crosswind that he had to defeat by pulling his mind tighter and tighter. The deep fatigue he carried into this night was not the fault of the world, but the price of demanding that the storm obey his command. This old account of the young archer on the high pass does not ask us to stop feeling our natural human emotions. It is not an invitation to become cold, unfeeling, or completely indifferent to the goals we hold dear. The wisdom of the Buddha is much softer, much more compassionate than that. It is showing us that a massive amount of our internal exhaustion does not come from the actual windstorms we meet in life, but from the desperate way our minds continue to pull the bowstring long after the arrow has already flown wide. When life presents us with an event that feels chaotic, unfair, or completely out of alignment with our hopes, our immediate instinct is to lock our posture and double our efforts, believing that if we just strain our thoughts a little bit harder, we can force reality to look different. This deep, internal tightening is what ancient practitioners recognized as the true root of human suffering. In our modern emotional language, we can call it the panicky, unyielding demand that says we cannot be safe or satisfied until we have compelled the current moment to follow our specific design. We believe that if we worry enough, plan enough, or anticipate every possible failure, we can build a perfect shield against the unexpected. But this mental activity behaves exactly like Sora's overstrained willow bough. Every time we try to use our anxiety to force an unpredictable circumstance into a straight line, a sharp, punishing vibration travels straight back into our own nervous system, splintering our peace and leaving us completely drained. The original disruption in your life, whether it is an unexpected change in your health, a sudden shift in a relationship, or a plan that falls completely flat, is like encountering a natural gust of wind on an exposed ridge. That is simply the raw weather of existence. It is unpredictable, changing, and entirely beyond your personal control. But when we get furious at the wind for blowing sideways, when we lie awake in the dark demanding that the storm stop moving, we are adding an entire layer of unnecessary agony onto our shoulders. We are splitting our own wood by refusing to accept the atmospheric reality of the world. The suffering grows when we add our resistance to the original pain, turning a single passing storm into a continuous internal battle. True awareness is the capacity to sit quietly on your mat and listen to the roar of the gale without immediately reaching for your arrows. It is the ability to uneven, uncarved textures of your current life, your current worries, and your shifting feelings, and to let them be wide and wild for a time. When you practice this kind of presence, you are not surrendering to failure. You are simply giving your arms a chance to heal from the friction of the cord. You are acknowledging that some things cannot be pierced by sheer willpower, no matter how hard you strain, and that your fundamental worth as a human being does not depend on your ability to conquer the weather. This brings us closer to a beautiful, reassuring truth about the impermanence of all things. The chaotic currents that disrupt your life today are not permanent walls that will block your progress forever. They are shifting, moving, and being reshaped by forces far greater than your individual ego. When we stop trying to fight the air by force, we begin to see that the wind is already moving along of its own accord. We can breathe a little easier, knowing that we do not have to be the sole master of every outcome. We can let the universe hold its own unpredictable weather, while we focus entirely on the small, quiet space right around our own feet. In a short while, we will explore how this shift in perspective changes the way we navigate our daily challenges, and how a completely different way of aiming can bring us into balance with the terrain. But right now, let the weight of this understanding settle deep into your chest. Notice how much effort it takes to maintain that rigid, protective posture you have been carrying all through the day. See if you can acknowledge the deep exhaustion of your own mind, the part of you that has been pulling the line so furiously against tomorrow, trying to prevent any sudden disruptions from happening. Compassion begins when you look at your own bleeding, tired spirit, and decide that you have strained hard enough for one day. It is the gentle willingness to let the broken pieces of your expectations lie in the dirt without judging yourself for the mess. You are allowed to be an unstrung bow. You are allowed to have days that do not end in perfect achievement, and situations that still have sharp, difficult corners. Letting go does not mean you walk away from your journey or abandon your purpose. It simply means you lay down the heavy, exhausting demand for absolute certainty, and you trust that there is another way to live without breaking your own tools. If it feels right, let your attention gather entirely within the quiet boundaries of your body resting here in the darkness. There is no need to adjust your position quickly or attempt any formal breathing patterns right now. Perhaps you can simply allow the back of your head to drop just a fraction deeper into the fabric beneath you. Feel the vast support that rises up through the frame of your bed, a steady surface that asks nothing from you in return for carrying your weight. You do not need to keep yourself suspended by your own muscular effort tonight. You can afford to loosen the small protective lines around your collarbone, letting your ribs drop down into a natural, unforced rhythm. Take a slow, unhurried breath into the lower part of your belly, feeling the gentle swell of your skin against your clothing. As the air leaves your lips, do not push it out with aggression, but simply let it fall away like mist dissipating on a cold ridge. With each quiet exhale, you might imagine that the fibers of your mind are beginning to loosen, row by row, uncoiling from the heavy tension they have held all through the daylight hours. There is absolutely no pressure to achieve a state of perfect bliss or total mental emptiness right now. Even just noticing that your shoulders feel a little tight is a beautiful, complete act of presence. As you lie here in the dark, let yourself bring to mind one specific problem or situation that has been causing you to worry over the past few days. It might be a difficult interaction that left an unpleasant taste in your mouth, a decision that feels heavy and unresolved, or a sudden change in your circumstances that you did not want. Do not push this memory away, and do not dive headfirst into trying to solve it or fix it for tomorrow. Instead, see if you can simply look at this problem as if it were a target staked on the opposite side of a deep chasm, entirely surrounded by a swirling crosswind that you cannot control. Notice the unpredictable lines of this situation, and observe how your mind naturally wants to react by pulling a line tight to hit it. Now, if it feels comfortable, imagine that you are holding that unpolished willowwood bough from our story, its handle marked by a deep microfracture, resting heavily across your lap. This weapon represents the deep, ancient habit of your mind, the urge to strain your thoughts until reality fits a straight design. Feel the physical weight of that wood, the tightness of its string, and the sheer amount of energy it takes just to keep it pulled back toward your ear. Recognize that every anxious thought, every silent judgment, and every rehearsal of the future is another heavy strain against that splintering wood. You have been holding that bowstring tight for hours, and your inner hands are deeply blistered from the effort. There is no need to force yourself to heal or to completely resolve this problem right this second. Instead, you might try a very quiet experiment in your imagination. Gently loosen your grip and let that heavy willow bough drop softly into the dark grass beneath you. Imagine the physical sensation of your arms naturally widening and dropping flat against the bed the moment that cold tension leaves your hands. Look out across the chasm at the target of your problem and choose to leave it exactly as it is for the rest of the night. You do not need to hit the center. You do not need to correct its alignment, and you do not need to force a straight path through the wind before you are allowed to sleep. Let the image of the target slowly change in your mind, fading gently into the soft blue evening shadows of the high pass. Watch as the sharp, threatening outlines of the wooden stake dissolve into the general darkness of the landscape, becoming just another part of the vast mountain that surrounds you. The problem is still there, but you are no longer standing over it with an unyielding weapon, exhausting your spirit by demanding that the wind stop blowing. You are simply sitting beside it in the grass, letting the weather have its own wild movement, while you take a long, deep breath of the cool air. You can return to your everyday responsibilities whenever you are ready tomorrow morning. But for these next few hours, the world does not require your supervision. The people in your life do not need you to be perfectly strong or entirely certain tonight. Even if your path feels messy, unfinished, and full of sudden drops, you are safe enough to rest right in the middle of the terrain. Let the rhythmic rise and fall of your chest carry you away from the noise of the struggle, guiding your spirit deeper into the quiet, unstrung dark of the late night. The high mountain winter arrived without any warning at the pass of the iron grass, bringing with it a freezing, heavy sleet that coated the sideways blades in a thick layer of clear ice. Sora remained at the thatch hut, his bleeding fingers healing slowly into rough, thick patches of skin, but his mind still wrestled with the memory of his splintered bow. One morning, the storm shifted direction entirely, blowing a sudden gust so fierce that it yanked the original wooden target out of the frozen ground and sent it tumbling down into the dark abyss of the ravine. The clear goal he had spent weeks aiming at was gone, replaced by a vast, empty void of gray clouds and swirling ice particles. Sora felt a cold, familiar weight grip the very center of his chest. His immediate impulse was to run down to the lower slopes, gather fresh timber, and build a new target to plant back into the earth so he could continue his training. He wanted to replace what the storm had stolen. He wanted to reclaim a clear sense of destination. But as he stepped out into the freezing slush, he noticed Master Jin sitting quietly under the small overhang of the thatch roof, holding a single object across his knees. It was a single goose-feather-fletched arrow with a blunt copper tip, completely unadorned and heavy with age. The old Fletcher did not instruct the young man to begin rebuilding the target, nor did he lament the loss of their marker. He simply handed the copper-tipped shaft to Sora, letting the cold metal touch the young man's rough palms. Jin then stood up, his thin linen robes snapping loudly in the freezing wind, and guided Sora back to the very edge of the icy cliff face. The gale between the ridges was louder now, a high, roaring chant that seemed to challenge their very presence on the mountain. Sora looked out into the blank expanse of white mist, his body naturally tightening as he prepared to resist the freezing air. Instead of asking Sora to draw a new bow or to fight the current, Jin reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small hollow bamboo tube. He held it up to his lips and blew a single low note that blended completely with the whistling gale. The sound did not cut through the storm by force. It did not try to silence the roar of the mountain. It simply rode upon the moving air, rising and falling with the natural crests of the wind, sounding like a bird gliding safely through a tempest. Jin lowered the reed, turned his sightless eyes toward the young traveler, and told him that the mistake was never the movement of the wind, but the belief that the arrow must travel in a line separate from the mountain. Sora stood on the slick stone, his breath freezing into small white clouds that drifted away instantly in the crosscurrents. He looked down at the blunt copper tip of the arrow, and for the first time, he did not look for a target to pierce. He took a long, slow breath of the freezing air, letting the chill settle deep into his lungs before he made a move. He did not rush into action, and he did not demand a guarantee of success. He simply raised his arms, holding the single arrow loosely between his fingers, and pointed it directly into the strongest vortex of the oncoming storm. A quiet, profound transformation began to occur in the way Sora moved his body. He did not notch the arrow onto a string, and he did not pull a wooden frame until it splintered. Instead, he waited for a massive gust to hit the cliff face, and with a small, disciplined flick of his wrist, he launched the copper-tipped shaft straight into the teeth of the gale. The arrow did not fly straight. It instantly caught the violent updraft, curving sharply to the left, soaring high into the gray clouds, and then diving gracefully down with the moving air, tracing a beautiful, fluid arc that perfectly matched the invisible shape of the mountain wind. The young archer watched the flight path dissolve into the fog, his chest dropping as a deep wave of relief finally broke through his internal defenses. He realized that his true suffering had never been caused by the disappearance of the target or the strength of the winter storm. His agony had been born entirely from his own rigid requirement that his journey must be linear, predictable, and clean. He had been treating every unexpected delay, every loss, and every shifting current in his life as an enemy to be conquered, rather than learning how to let his spirit glide along the contours of reality. This change did not make Sora a flawless master who never experienced doubt or fear again. It was a subtle internal shift that showed itself in his quiet posture. He knelt down in the freezing slush right at the edge of the chasm, and instead of reaching for another weapon, he simply laid his empty hands flat upon his knees. He allowed the cold sleet to hit his face without flinching, and he allowed the loud roar of the wind to fill his ears without trying to think his way around it. He sat completely still in the middle of a landscape that remained entirely unpredictable, finally learning how to rest his mind within the wild, unmapped weather of the present moment. The fluid flight of that copper-tipped arrow curving through the gray mist brings us directly to the core of our own psychological habits. When we examine the true anatomy of our mental exhaustion, we find that our minds spend an enormous amount of energy acting like a busy workshop that never turns off its lamps. We use the mechanism of control to insulate ourselves from the deep vulnerability of not knowing what lies ahead. We trick ourselves into believing that if we can just anticipate every bad review, secure total validation from everyone we meet, and maintain a flawless standard of performance, we will finally be safe from the messy textures of life. When the world refuses to match our neat internal design, we often turn our tools inward, using self-judgment and shame as a harsh method to try and force our own hearts into a better alignment. We look at our anxiety, our grief, or our natural fatigue, and we treat those feelings as flaws that must be violently hammered out of existence. Over time, we can even start to turn our very pain into an identity, becoming the person who is chronically overwhelmed, the one who must always carry the heaviest burden, or the one who is permanently broken by a past storm. This psychological habit is exactly like standing on an icy cliff and trying to stop a winter gale by swinging your fists at the sky until your knuckles bleed. Buddhist insight draws a very clean, essential line between two completely different types of discomfort that we experience as human beings. The first kind of discomfort is the raw, uncarved reality of life itself. The sudden storm that drops ice on your path, the loss of a close connection, the physical aging of the body, or the unexpected detour in your plans. This raw reality is simply the terrain beneath your feet, unforced, unpredictable, and entirely beyond your personal control. You cannot walk through a real life without encountering these rough edges. The second kind of discomfort, however, is entirely constructed by our own internal resistance. The extra suffering we generate when we lie awake in the dark and demand that the storm should not have happened, or when we punish ourselves for not being strong enough to prevent the frost. We can see this difference by looking at how a flexible blade of iron grass interacts with a heavy mountain wind. The fast-moving air itself is the first kind of pressure, a natural occurrence that forces the blade down. The second kind of pressure would occur if the grass tried to remain completely upright, fighting the current with a rigid spine until its stem fractured under the strain. Peace does not arrive because you have successfully built a massive, airtight dome that keeps the wind from ever blowing through your house. True, lasting stability is found when you develop the internal flexibility to bend with the gale, dropping the heavy, exhausting demand for absolute linear certainty. When you stop treating every unexpected shift as an emergency that you must personally correct, you stop feeding the secondary suffering that keeps your nervous system in a state of panic. You begin to understand that you can have a chaotic, unfinished week and still be a whole human being, and that you can live in a world with changing weather and still find a corner where you can safely close your eyes. This means that your current feeling of being overwhelmed is not a sign that you are failing at life, but merely a signal that you have been holding the bowstring too tightly, trying to yank an unpredictable world into a straight line until your palms are raw. You do not need to look at your habit of overthinking with hatred or disgust, since that habit was just a clumsy protective tool you picked up a long time ago when the world felt too dangerous and chaotic. You thought that if you pulled the line hard enough, you could keep your heart safe from being hurt again. We can choose to relate to our vulnerabilities in a completely different way tonight, letting our rough edges exist without immediately reaching for a weapon to change them. Instead of using your thoughts to criticize the shape of your current life, you can choose to meet your uneven pieces with a soft, spacious curiosity. You can observe your lingering worries about tomorrow without treating them as commands that must be answered before midnight. You can let your uneven, unpolished feelings exist exactly as they are right now, allowing them to rest in the dark like the heavy wood on the high pass, while you simply listen to the quiet movement of the night air around you. Let us carry this ancient understanding of the windswept past down into the very small, ordinary moments of your modern afternoon and evening. We do not live on an exposed mountain ridge, but we walk through a different kind of complicated terrain every single day. You might feel this friction when you are staring at a glowing screen, waiting for a message that refuses to arrive, feeling the muscles in your face lock up with every passing minute. You feel it when you look at the accomplishments of a peer and instantly decide that your own lifeline is crooked, lagging behind, or missing some vital symmetry. You feel it when you put on an energetic front for a colleague, while your chest is carrying a block of heavy clay, hiding your true exhaustion because you believe that showing a hint of strain is a sign of complete failure. This desperate urge to straighten out your life shows up in the way you constantly reach for your device, checking for some external notification that will temporarily reassure you that you are doing enough. It appears when you lie awake at midnight, replaying a minor conversational error from 3 days ago, using your memory like an iron mallet to smash your past words until they sound different. We often treat our relationships like aiming exercises, trying to control our partners, our children, or our friends into a path that feels safe and predictable to us. We even feel a deep sense of guilt when we try to take a simple break, believing that we must first complete every task on our list before we have earned the right to drop our tools. But true mindfulness is practiced in the tiny pauses you create right in the middle of these domestic storms. When an anxious thought surfaces during your day, shouting that you must fix everything immediately, wisdom is the ability to breathe before you answer. It is the quiet choice to look at that frantic thought and recognize that it is merely a single loose feather floating through the air, not a command that you must obey with your hands. You can care deeply about your life, your work, and the people around you without holding on to their outcomes with a panicky, suffocating grip. You can allow a relationship to have its own unique, unexpected curves without demanding that it follow your exact blueprint. Taking a rest is not a reward that you must buy with a day of absolute productivity. You are allowed to lay down your heavy concerns simply because your spirit is tired, without needing to justify your stillness to anyone, including yourself. When you let go of the need to edit your life while you are trying to sleep, You are practicing the loose, flexible grace of the unstrung willow bough. You are choosing to lay your awareness gently over your current circumstances, letting your mind follow the natural, uneven contours of your reality instead of trying to flatten them with a hammer. You are accepting that a day can end with unfinished tasks, unresolved questions, and messy corners, and that its lack of completion does not diminish your value as a human being. Tomorrow will bring its own set of shifting winds, its own hard choices, and its own unpredictable currents. But you do not have to build the entire path across the mountain before tomorrow morning. For now, let your phone remain dark on the table, its constant demands for attention completely silenced by the late hour. Let the unmade parts of your future sit quietly in the dark like the raw, uncarved wood on the high pass. You can breathe softly into this very room, knowing that you have strained hard enough for one day, and that your only duty right now is to let your heavy body sink into the deep, welcoming stillness of the night. The wild roaring of the gale upon the pass of the iron grass is beginning to subside, slowing its frantic whistling until it becomes nothing more than a soft, rhythmic whisper against the frozen stones. The icy particles that filled the air during the afternoon storm have all drifted down into the deep canyons, leaving the upper peaks completely silent under a vast canopy of quiet dark. The tools of the artisan resting on the dry straw mat, cold, still, and entirely free of tension. Let your own internal workshop drop its tools in the exact same manner tonight. Your breathing is becoming noticeably heavy, drawing its steady fuel from a deep, unhurried space inside your belly, moving out into your quiet bedroom without the slightest hint of effort. With every slow exhalation, you can feel the vast gravity of your muscles increasing, sinking downward, pressing into the solid welcome of the mattress like a heavy piece of wood that has finally found its permanent resting place in the quiet earth. Let your tired arms completely drop away from the memory of the pulling cord. Your fingertips can uncurl entirely now, softening their posture, widening until there is nothing left but space between your palms. The sharp, demanding outlines of your unresolved goals are losing their intensity, dissolving into the deep indigo ink of the late hour. You do not need to reshape a single fragment of your path tonight. You do not have to carve out a smooth passage through your immediate fears before your eyes are permitted to close for the night. The unaligned pieces of your history, the complicated knot of your thoughts, and the sudden detours of your current week are all allowed to remain completely crooked, wide and uncorrected while the dark lasts. Listen to the absolute silence that is expanding through your room. A vast quietude that does not require you to hit a single target or prove your strength to earn its protection. The great mountain of your life is resting perfectly against the night sky, its uneven peaks and deep chasms fully supported by the ground without anyone needing to hold the landscape straight. You are an organic part of that vast, unmeasured landscape. You are allowed to be an unfinished line. You are allowed to have days that do not end in perfect completion, and journeys that turn at sudden, unexpected angles. There is no requirement for you to justify the space you occupy while your body is at rest. Let the soft, flexible thread of your breath guide your awareness deeper into the stillness, winding smoothly through the natural hollows of your frame, carrying away the last remnants of the day's friction. There is no failure in your current fatigue. There is only the natural, beautiful return of a spirit that has chosen to unnotch its arrow. Let the bowstring go slack and return to its own silent sanctuary. You can leave the raw weather of your life exactly as it is outside your window. The changing currents will be there tomorrow, waiting for a softer gaze, a slower hand, and a more patient heart. But tonight the storm has moved past the ridge, the weapon is down, and your spirit is entirely free to dissolve into the deep, welcoming, and boundless stillness of the night. What if the certainty you have been straining your entire life to conquer was never waiting at the center of the target, but was always breathing quietly within the very wind you were trying so hard to defeat? The quiet vibration of that single question seems to ripple out across the dark floor, softening the air until even the silence of the room feels thick with rest. It is a space that does not ask you to quickly find a logical answer, or to resume the heavy mental tracking of your daytime responsibilities. The inquiry is simply a soft hand placed upon a tight shoulder, letting you know that the struggle itself can be abandoned without any fear of falling behind. Your breathing is continuing its deep, rhythmic tide, completely unbothered by the lingering questions of the mind, carrying you further and further away from the urgent rhythm of the daylight hours. You are allowed to let the world exist in its raw, unpolished state for the rest of the night, trusting that the dark will wrap itself perfectly around every uneven edge of your life. Every slow inhalation is a return to this original state of non-resistance. Throughout the day, the mind operates under a deep, frantic habit of over-engineering, treating every unexpected event as a crisis that must be immediately corrected by our own willpower. We look at our grief, our confusion, or our deep exhaustion, and we handle those states like defects that must be hammered flat before we are worthy of peace. But as you lie here beneath the heavy weave of the dark, that entire workshop can go cold. Your crooked lines, your unmade decisions, and your sudden changes of direction do not make you an imperfect person. They are simply the unique, windswept geography of the life you are living. True emotional freedom is not the achievement of a life that is entirely flat and certain, but the cultivation of a heart that is wide enough to let the wind blow through without fracturing. It means that when an unexpected shift occurs in your career, your routine, or your relationships, you no longer reach for your old weapons of panic or self-judgment. You learn to drop your hands, to feel the cool air of reality exactly as it presents itself, and to let your awareness glide along the curve of the change. You begin to realize that the mountain does not need to be leveled for the traveler to find a resting place, and that an unmapped, twisting trail can still lead a tired heart back home to its own inner temple. Give yourself full permission to leave yourself completely unsolved tonight. You do not have to look back at the choices of your week through the lens of criticism, using your thoughts like a heavy line to pull past conversations into a different symmetry. The past is a path that has already been traced through the high grass, and no amount of internal strain can change the direction it took across the ridge. You can let it be finished, you can let it be still, and you can let it rest in the dark without your supervision. By relinquishing the demand to rewrite your history, you give the blisters on your spirit a chance to heal, allowing your inner self to recover from the long weight of holding a tight line. The night is deepening now, dropping its vast indigo curtains across the small details of your room until every sharp outline of the furniture is entirely swallowed by the shadows. In this late hour, there are no expectations left to meet, no records to break, and no standards of perfection to maintain. Everything has dissolved into a quiet, boundless ocean of darkness that requires absolutely nothing from you but your heavy presence. Your body feels remarkably solid, resting against the bed like a willow tree that has dropped its leaves for the winter, no longer fighting the sky, but simply sinking its roots deep into the steady support of the dark earth. You can hear the low, steady rustle of the world outside your walls, a soft reminder that life is carrying itself forward beautifully, without the help of your analytical mind. The tides are shifting, the wind is moving across the distant hills, and the forest is resting in the dark, all without a single drop of effort or planning from your thoughts. You do not have to be the sole provider of your tomorrow while your eyes are closed. You do not have to secure the outcome of every situation before you are permitted to let your spirit rest. Let the final pieces of your worries sink deep into the quiet ground beneath your mattress, fading away like the white mist that fills the lower valleys at dusk. The path ahead of you does not need to be linear or predictable for you to find complete safety within its borders. You can lie here, entirely surrounded by the changing weather of your existence, and trust that the universe will hold your weight even when you choose to let the bowstring go entirely slack. The workshop is dark, the unpolished willow wood is quiet in the grass, and your heart is finally safe enough to surrender its defenses and dissolve into the deep, welcoming, and boundless stillness of the night. The deep, welcoming, and boundless stillness of the night is an expanse that knows nothing of quotas, measurements, or incomplete tallies. It does not look at the path behind you and count the miles you have yet to level. Nor does it look at your tired spirit and demand a final calculation of your productivity before the dawn. As you descend further into this dark, restorative current, you can feel the last microscopic traces of the day's over-engineering drifting away from your mind, like fine dust settling into the silent cracks of the mountain stone. The air in your room carries a profound, comforting gravity, a gentle blanket of shadow that encourages your breath to slow even further, moving in perfect, effortless rhythm with the timeless darkness that surrounds you. This soft space of absolute rest is the ultimate sanctuary for a mind that has spent years running itself ragged against the unpredictable currents of the world. In our everyday lives, we are constantly holding ourselves to an invisible, unyielding standard of performance, comparing our internal struggles with the polished exteriors of those around us, and treating our moments of fatigue as personal defects that must be violently hammered away. We look at our self-doubt or our lingering fears as hostile forces that we must conquer through sheer mental force before we are allowed to feel acceptable. But this ancient understanding reminds us that your peace is not a fortress you must construct with your own straining hands. It is the soft, open ground that has been waiting beneath your tools all along. Think of the vast, ancient forests that carpet the lower slopes of the mountain pass, standing quiet and undisturbed beneath the dark velvet of the midnight sky. They do not spend their hours of darkness measuring their growth against the neighboring trees, nor do they panic when an autumn wind scatters their leaves, or a winter frost hardens the soil around their roots. They do not demand that the seasons follow a perfectly straight, predictable timeline to suit their comfort. They simply yield to the changing weather, allowing the cold to slow their sap, allowing the rain to wash their branches, and trusting the deep, invisible networks beneath the earth to sustain them through every cycle of change. You are made of the very same natural elements as those silent woods, and you carry within your own nervous system the exact same ancient capacity to let life move through you without breaking your inner core. Let your breathing become so quiet, so weightless, that it resembles the faint brushing of a loose feather against the dry thatch of Master Jin's roof. There is no longer any need to manage the depth of your inhalations, or to force your chest into a specific posture of relaxation. Just let the cool air slide in naturally, bringing the vast unstrung space of the high pass directly into the tired corners of your heart, and then let it drop away without a single thought of control, carrying into the dark the final, stubborn knots of your daytime vigilance. With every unhurried rise and fall of your ribcage, you are moving miles away from the loud, demanding arena of your analytical thoughts, sinking deeper into the quiet, protected valley of your own pure awareness. Imagine that your remaining obligations, your unmade decisions, and your worries about the future are like the small, irregular feathers that guide an arrow through a storm. They do not need to be plucked out or flattened into a rigid line to be useful. Their very flexibility, their softness, and their ability to catch the air are what allow the arrow to trace its beautiful, curved arc through the gale, without snapping in mid-flight. When you look at your vulnerabilities with this deep, non-judgmental compassion, you see that nothing inside your heart needs to be violently repaired or driven out for you to be whole tonight. Your uneven pieces, your moments of hesitation, and your unpolished feelings are not flaws in your construction. They are simply the beautiful, necessary contours of a human life, learning how to move in harmony with the wind. The great world outside your home has fully surrendered its activities to the late hour, the busy paths and crowded marketplaces falling into a deep, necessary slumber. The mountains do not feel a sense of guilt for remaining silent while the valleys sleep, nor do the wild birds feel inadequate because they halt their flight when the light disappears from the sky. They understand with a silent, instinctual wisdom that requires no words, that resting is not an indulgence that must be bought with ceaseless labor, but a sacred return to the source from which all strength arises. You are fully permitted to join in that quiet return tonight, leaving the architecture of your tomorrow completely uncarved and unmapped while your body recovers its natural vitality. Let your consciousness dissolve completely into the wide, peaceful dark that fills your bedroom, feeling the walls of your room open up until you are resting under the vast, boundless canopy of the late-night sky. The sharp boundaries that divide your thoughts from the world are melting away, softening like a drop of morning dew evaporating into the vast warmth of the midnight air. You are not a lonely archer fighting an endless war against a hostile storm. You are a single, peaceful point of awareness resting securely within a universe that already knows exactly how to hold its own weight. The iron bow is cold in the grass, the string is completely slack, and your heart is finally safe enough to lay down its shield, drop its aim, and surrender entirely to the deep, welcoming, and boundless stillness of the night. This dark expanse holds no memory of the deadlines that chased you through the sunlit hours, nor does it keep a record of the targets you did not hit before the light faded from the sky. As you slip beneath the heavy, quiet current of this late hour, you can feel the last lingering echoes of your daytime vigilance drifting away from your thoughts, like fine powder dissolving into the silent crevices of the mountain stone. The air in your room carries a comforting, protective density, a gentle weight that seems to lay itself softly across your chest, inviting your breathing to slow down into a deep, natural rhythm that matches the vast stillness of the night. You have stepped entirely off the exposed ledge of your responsibilities, leaving the wind to move through the high grass while you remain completely safe, unobserved, and anchored in the dark. This gentle letting go is a profound act of self-reconciliation, a moment where you finally stop treating your own tired heart like a weapon that must be kept under constant tension. Throughout the day, the analytical mind relies on a persistent, exhausting habit of over-engineering, convincing us that if we can just anticipate every mistake or secure total approval from the world around us, we will finally achieve a state of safety. We look at our natural vulnerabilities, our hesitations, or our deep fatigue, and we view them as personal flaws that must be violently hammered out of our character. But in the quiet sanctuary of this room, you can see that the tension itself was the only thing fracturing your peace. The moment you unknot your worries and let the bowstring go entirely slack, the internal friction drops away, revealing an underlying stability that never actually left you. Think of the ancient, massive stone ridges that rise out of the earth, standing silent and majestic beneath the deep indigo canopy of the midnight sky. They do not spend their nights analyzing the ancient storms that shape their cliffsides, nor do they panic over the unpredictable weather of the coming season. They do not demand that the wind blow in straight lines or that the snow fall in neat, symmetrical patterns to suit their design. They simply sit in the middle of the changing environment, allowing the rain to wash over their rough textures, allowing the fog to cover their peaks, and allowing the dark to swallow them completely when the sun goes down. You are made of the very same natural elements as those enduring peaks, and you possess the exact same capacity to let the changing weather of your life move around you without breaking your inner core. Let your breath become so light, so unforced, that it resembles the soft rustling of the sideways grass on the lower slopes of the mountain pass. There is no requirement for you to regulate its depth or to force your body into a synthetic posture of meditation right now. Just let the cool air flow in naturally, bringing the vast, unstrung freedom of the high ridge directly into the heavy space behind your eyes, and then let it drop away without a single thought of supervision. With every effortless rise and fall of your chest, you are stepping further and further away from the noisy, frantic workshop of your thoughts, moving deeper into the quiet, protected valley of your own pure awareness. Imagine that your many unresolved problems, your unmade choices, and your fears about tomorrow are like the small, blunt, copper-tipped arrows resting quietly inside an old leather quiver on the floor. They do not need to be fired tonight. They do not need to find a destination, and they do not need to pierce the darkness to prove your worth as a person. They can simply remain inactive, cold, and still in the grass, while you take a well-earned rest from the long season of aiming. When you meet your life with this radical, non-judgmental compassion, you see that nothing inside your heart needs to be violently corrected before you are allowed to sleep. Your mistakes and your unfinished paths are not signs of a broken life. They are simply the raw, beautiful terrain of a human spirit learning how to move in harmony with reality. The great world outside your walls has fully surrendered its frantic movements to the late hour, the busy paths and crowded streets falling into a deep, restorative slumber. The trees do not feel a sense of inadequacy because they pause their growth during the dark hours. Nor do the wild birds feel guilty because they halt their flight when the light disappears from the sky. They understand with a silent instinctual wisdom that rest is not a luxury that must be earned through endless labor, but a sacred, necessary return to the quiet source of all life. You are permitted to join in that quiet return tonight, leaving the architecture of your tomorrow completely uncarved and unmapped while your body recovers its natural strength. Let your consciousness drift completely out into the wide, peaceful darkness that fills your bedroom, feeling the borders of your room open up until you are resting under the vast, boundless canopy of the late-night sky. The sharp dividing lines that separate your mind from the world are melting away, softening like a single drop of morning dew, dissolving into the vast, invisible humidity of the midnight air. You are not a solitary archer fighting a desperate war against a hostile storm. You are a single, peaceful point of awareness resting securely within a universe that already knows exactly how to balance its own weight. The iron bow is cold in the grass, the string is completely slack, and your heart is finally safe enough to drop its aim, lay down its shield, and surrender entirely to the deep, welcoming, and boundless stillness of the night. Here are 3 YouTube title options based on this journey of inner peace. Buddha's wisdom for the exhausted mind. Why trying to force certainty is stealing your peace. Zen secrets to overcoming hypervigilance. Stop fighting the storm and finally sleep. Buddha said your life is not a target, a Zen sleep story for letting go of tomorrow.